Hello everyone. So in the last video, we had been talking about temperament, and I told you that there are these further classifications for temperament, which come in the form of either inhibited or more sociable or uninhibited. I will be uploading a video for this, and you'll be able to see what findings about these children are. But when we talk about this, we also talk about when we look at temperament, we also ask questions about how stable is something like temperament, right? So even though what we see is that for the most part, temperament seems to be something that's stable over time, that's something that can be carried on into your adulthood as you grow. But what we see is that with different circumstances, temperament can also change. With something like sensitive caregiving, temperament can also change, right? Another thing that we see is that, what influences could there be on temperament? So there seem to be, two broad categories of influences. The first of which are genetic influences, right? And the second of which are more environmental influences, right? So genetic influences basically, perhaps when we talk about genetic influences, what we basically see is that perhaps there is an inherited disposition to act in a particular way. Environmental influences, and this is something that we'll see later with attachment as well, that because of the quality of caregiving or because of the situation that a family is in. So, for example, it's possible that there are multiple siblings already, and therefore attention for the newborn is something that is not very easily available. So that will obviously have consequences for the child's temperament, right? Next, we move on to this topic. We're talking about, the time that each child gets, right? And relevant to this, and we've talked about, this earlier as well, is this idea of attachment. So, what exactly is attachment? How do we define attachment? The way that we define attachment is that, attachment is essentially an affectionate tie, right? That, an individual shares with another individual, right? And it's such a tie that whenever, there is contact between, the two people who share an attachment, right? So the contact is something that's pleasurable, right? So it's pleasurable in the sense that it gives or it provides comfort, right? So attachment is basically an affectionate tie between two people, which provides pleasure, which provides comfort. If you are stressed, having that person around that you are attached to, right? It eases whatever distress you are in to a certain degree. It eases whatever stress that you're experiencing, right? So that is our definition of attachment. Now, in our previous chapter as well, when we were considering different theories that look at attachment, we had talked about an individual, right, by the name of John Bowlby. Now, Bowlby's take on attachment was that, his ethological theory of attachment was this, that attachment is basically something has that is evolutionary, first of all, right? And that it has some form of adaptive value, right? Now, I think it's very clear what adaptive value attachment would have in the sense that, if you form an attachment to a particular caregiver, right? What does that do for the child? That ensures that the child will be taken care of, right? That they will be provided food, that they will be protected from all kinds of danger, that they will be in a safe and secure environment, right? So the adaptive value for us is clear. It is that, the child will be secure, they will be able to survive because of this attachment, right? Now, there was a student of Bowlby's by the name of Mary Ainsworth, right? Mary Ainsworth, what she did was that she expanded on John Bowlby's work, right? And what she did was that she created this sort of lab experiment, right? In which what happened was that mothers brought in their children and they were exposed to what she called the strain situation. I will be uploading a video on this as well so that you guys can see the actual experiment, right? But what happened in this strain situation experiment was that a mother brought in her child, right, to the lab setting that had been set up, and there were particular steps involved in how this experiment rolled out, and certain observations were made, right? So, in the experiment, what was crucial was certain observations at particular points, right? Now, at what particular points? Let me just show that to you. Here we have a chart which basically outlines what the episodes in a strange situation are, right? So the first step is that what you do is that the researcher introduces parent and baby to a playroom. So there's a playroom that's been set up. The parent comes in, right? There's a researcher there who introduces the parent and the baby to the playroom, and then they leave them, right? So they leave the mother and the child in the playroom alone, right? Here you have no observation, right? In the second episode, what you do is, and what we mean by episode is not that this is happening after, let's say, a day or so, it's happening in the same time. So, a parent has brought their child in, you show them into a room, and you leave the room, right? Then what you do is that the parent sits on a chair in the playroom, and what you see is what does the baby do, right? Now here it says something that parent as a secure base. Now what does that mean? So according to Mary Ainsworth, there was such a thing which she termed secure attachment, right? This is something that we sort of touched on this earlier as well when we were looking at all of the different emotional milestones that children have according to particular ages. One of the things that we see is that when children are between 0 to 6 months of age, no, sorry, 0 to 6 weeks of age, right? They are in a phase which, Mary Ainsworth and colleagues call the pre attachment phase, right? What does this mean? This basically means that at this stage, children do not have you know, an attachment to the mother in a very clear cut fashion. So, even though at 0 to 6 weeks, we've talked about how when children are born, right, they do recognize mother's voice and smell, but as yet, they do not show any sort of preference to be handled by the mother than by anyone else. So a child will not start crying if the mother leaves, right? A child will not show signs of distress at seeing the mother leaving. If a child is crying because they're uncomfortable, anyone who picks them up, the child might get comforted by them, right? After what you see is, after 6 weeks, when we look at the next stage, right? So around 6 weeks to around 6 to 8 months, right? The next phase is called attachment in the making phase. Now, what does this mean? This basically means that a child vocalizes much more when the mother is around, right? So there's more vocalization. That means that the child babbles more when so vocalizations increase with the mother's presence. The child smiles and laughs a lot more with the mother's presence or whoever the primary caregiver is, right? So smiles plus laughs a lot more with the mother's presence, but still the the child does not get extremely upset if the mother is not there or if the primary caregiver is not there, right? After what we see this is 6 months onwards. From this stage, so 6 months onwards, what you see is something that's called, clear-cut attachment. So there is visible attachment in the sense that you have what is called separation anxiety, right? You have both separation anxiety in the sense that a child begins to get distressed at the caregiver or the mother leaving, distress at caregiver leaving, right? And here at this stage, you also have what is termed that children start to use the caregiver as a secure base. Now, what does that mean? That basically what children start to do is that they start to explore, because you also need to remember that 6 months onwards children are more mobile. They start to crawl, and so what they do is that they explore, but they use the parent or the caregiver, the primary caregiver, as a secure base. They come back to them for emotional reaffirmation. They come back to them, after every few minutes, for to seek comfort, right? So this is what we mean when we say that a child uses the parent as a secure base, right? Let's just look at the next stage as well before we go on to again looking at what the episodes of this strain situation are. The last phase of the development of attachment, what that entails is, basically that after this, after this stage, around 18 months onwards, right, what children develop is a reciprocal relationship, right? And around this time, what happens is that separation anxiety seems to lower, right? As children start to understand that there is a pattern to the primary caregivers leaving and coming back, right? They start to understand that even if they go away, they come back after a few hours, if let's say they're going to work or whatever it is that they're going, and they begin to negotiate. So separation anxiety decreases and negotiation starts. So a child might say, for example, that before you leave, make sure that you um, you know read me my favorite book, because by this time children are also able to express, right? Because language has set in, so they can put forth their demands because they are making strides in sort of representation and language, right? So this is what we mean when we talk about children using parents as a secure base, right? I hope this is clear now. Now let's go back to our discussion on Mary Ainsworth and her sort of experiment which involved the strange situation, right? So we talked about the first stage of it, which was that the researcher brings in the parent and introduces themselves and leaves them in a playroom. The second part of it is that parent is seated while the baby plays with toys, and then what you notice here is that does the child use the parent as a secure base? So does the child explore their environment and come back to the parent for comfort, right? For comfort seeking. The third stage here is that you have the stranger enter and they're seated and they start talking to parent, right? Now what you note here is what is the reaction of the child to unfamiliar adult. Then what you see is that the fourth stage is parent leaves room, stranger responds to baby and offers comfort if baby is upset. So here you have the parent leave the room, right? And the stranger is still there. At this stage, if the baby shows that they're uncomfortable or upset, the stranger is there to offer some comfort. Here, the observation that you're trying to look at is separation anxiety. So, does the child get upset when the caregiver leaves? How do they react to a caregiver versus a stranger? Are they different in how they react to a caregiver versus how they react to a stranger, or is it the same sort of behavior, right? Um, the fifth part of it is that you have the parent return and greet the baby and offer comfort, and stranger leaves room. Now, this is very, very important. The reunion is considered extremely important in assessing what sort of attachment that you observe, because see, the premise is that because the baby is upset at the parent leaving, their return, right, should ease their discomfort or ease their distress, right? So this is what you look at, that how do they react to the parent returning? Do they greet the parent with joy? Do they sort of cling to them at reunion, or are they disinterested in seeing the parent? Are they not bothered by whatever is going on? Are they angry at the parent? So all of these different behaviors are extremely important in this observation at this point. Then again, you have that, and the stranger also has left the room by this point. And then in the sixth stage, you also have parent who leaves room. And here again, you're noting separation anxiety, that, how does the child react in the situation when they're left alone and the parent leaves. Seventh is stranger enters room and offers comfort. You look at, are they able to be soothed by the stranger? How are they reacting to the stranger? Then you have parent returns again, greets baby and offers comfort if necessary, and tries to reinterest the baby in toys. And again, you look at, what is their reaction to the reunion, right? So these are the different stages of the strain situation. Now, based on this, Mary Ainsworth and colleagues devised these 4 different attachment styles, right? So what they saw was that there are 4 different kinds of attachment styles that children display, right? The first of which is a secure attachment. Now, what exactly is secure attachment? Secure attachment is that, firstly, the child uses the parent as a secure base. So when they're alone in the room with only the parent, they explore the room, right? And they explore the room using the parent as a secure base, right? The second is that they show that they're upset when the parent leaves, so there is evidence of separation anxiety, right? And the third is that they are soothed, or their distress is significantly lessened by the parent returning. So distress lessens at reunion, right? So this is basically, these are the characteristics of the secure attachment style. When you look at the strain situation, in the real life as well, securely attached infants, right? They use the parent as a secure base to explore new places, right? They do show separation anxiety. They react differently to a caregiver than they do with a stranger. And if the parent leaves and they come back, so their distress, whichever was present, is lessened by their return, right? So this is the attachment style, which is characterized as the secure attachment style, right? Now, the other attachment style is something that's called avoidant attachment style. This is the second attachment style that you have. Now, what exactly is avoidant attachment, right? Avoidant attachment is basically that the child shows little or no interest in the parent being present when they're, alone with the parent in the playroom. So there is indifference really towards the parent, right? There is no difference in how they react to the parent versus the stranger, right? Um, if the parent leaves the room, the child does not show reaction. So parent leaves and there is no reaction, right? And also after parent returns, there is again little reaction. Again, there is no reaction, right? So this is, what is termed an avoidant attachment, that the child is not securely attached with the parent. They do not show any preference for the parent over the stranger, right? So this is what is called the avoidant attachment style. Then you have another attachment style, which is called the resistant attachment style. Now, what is this? So here, what you see is, so in resistant attachment, what you see is that a child often fails to explore even when the parent is present, right? And they seek a lot of closeness to the parent, right? So they do not use the parent as a secure base. They're extremely clingy to the parent, right? Then they show distress when the parent leaves. So there is separation anxiety present, right? However, at reunion, these children are not, soothed very easily at reunion. So what they do is that they engage in something that's called, resistive behavior. So what they do is at reunion, what you see is that they're not soothed by the reunion. Rather, they might be pushing the parent or they might be hitting them. So there's some angry, behaviors involved in the resistance style of attachment, right? Now, there is this fourth category as well, which is termed, disorganized attachment. And this basically is the most insecure form of attachment that there is. And in this, what happens is that, children show a confused set of behaviors. So they might not greet the parent at all upon reunion, or they might have a very flat, depressed expression upon seeing the parent, or they might sort of look away and not look at the parent at reunion. So, this is really the most insecure style of attachment, and it's a set of very confused behaviors that the children display, and this is mostly the least common style of attachment that you see. The secure attachment is most often um, the most sort of prevalent pattern of attachment that you see in at least North America. And obviously, when we talk about attachment, and its patterns, we have to look at, how this might differ from one culture to the other. But, even when you're looking at different parenting styles and you're looking at different ways of showing affection, you do see that if caregiving is sensitive, right, you do see that a lot of children do form secure attachments, right? One of the things that you see is that this secure attachment or whatever attachment you have, it becomes what it does is that it becomes an internal working model. So, what you do is that you internalize this attachment style, and then it sort of becomes the internal working model for all future intimate relationships, right? So, attachment is therefore extremely important because you might be carrying on your attachment style into your adulthood and be sort of forming similar attachments with close people around you, right? Um, what else do we have to say about attachment? So, yes, culture would have an impact. Um, when we're talking about primary caregiver, you must have noticed that I use the word primary caregiver and mother interchangeably. The reason for that is because most often it is mothers who are the primary caregivers, but in more dual earner families, fathers also take on the role sometimes of being the primary caregiver. One of the things that you see is that with children, the involvement of the father is something that is seen as having long term benefits for a child's emotional health. Um, when you talk about paternal involvement, especially, right? Um, so there are a lot of long term benefits for it for psychological well being, and therefore, it's necessary that fathers are also encouraged to show nurturing behaviors towards their children, right? So, to supplement this, I will also be uploading this experiment that all of you can watch. So, there will be one video regarding this and another one that will be about social referencing. So, make sure that you watch both.